Hi there, and welcome to the Cotswold Explorer. I'm Robin Shuckburgh, and we're exploring the wonderful region of the Cotswolds in southwest England. We decided to revisit the centre of the region and find some hidden gems, places that are not quite so famous, but still just as beautiful. Today you find Ross, Widget, Gismo and me in a little village called Hampnett. Now, because winter's creeping on, we are bringing our Evans trip to a close by following him back to Oxford. And this takes the road pretty close to the new A40. Of course, in his day, the A40 didn't exist. So he came through these villages in a much quieter way. But what is fascinating to me is that these little tiny hidden villages, just a stone's throw from the great arterial road that runs all the way from London to the west coast of Wales. You can hear the road in the distance, but they still have this extraordinary atmosphere of peace and quiet. We're going to show you around Hampnett. It has a fascinating church and a beautiful village green down the slope of the stream. Come with me. The little lane that leads off the A40 is signposted Hampnett Village Only Gated Road, in an obvious attempt to stave off marauding crowds from the Great London to West Wales trunk road. If, despite their best efforts, you take the turning and drive into the little village, you'll understand why. Whilst the signs suggest a no-through road, the lane does in fact carry straight through Hampnett, arriving after a couple of miles at the Northleach prison, just outside Northleach itself. We have, of course, visited this medieval wool town, sitting on the Fosse Way Roman road and boasting an almost cathedral-like parish church. But when we were there, we still failed to register the presence of the lovely village of Hampnett. So unassuming and hidden is it. It sits at the top of a valley cut by a vigorous little stream that is an important tributary to the River Leach. Looking at this wonderful spurting spring, it's easy to understand why our medieval ancestors attributed supernatural and religious influence for their existence. It spews incredibly clear and totally unpolluted water, the very stuff of life, from a natural hole in the hillside. Only since we fully understood the workings of aquifers have we been able to give a somewhat more prosaic explanation for this wonderful phenomenon. Our predecessors gave credit to their god, often seeing the springs as a personal, miraculous favour from the Almighty. Could it be because we, in our wisdom, know the spring water is not a miracle, that we treat this life-giving substance with such disdain? By the time the streams have travelled no more than a few miles, they have become so polluted that I wouldn't even allow my grandchildren to swim in them, something I used to do as a child every summer's day. It truly is a scandal. The great trout streams of the Cotswolds are a shadow of what they were just 70 years ago. Even the mammalian river life is decimated. One thing simply follows another. I've recently joined a new setup called the Windrush Project, working with the Cotswolds River Trust to monitor the quality of the water in our local brooks and streams, in order to try and find a way to restore them to their former pristine condition. I'll keep you all posted on progress, but I have a nasty feeling it may not be pretty. Meanwhile, the stream is probably the explanation for the presence of the settlement of Hampnett itself. First recorded in the Domesday Book in 1086, although substantial evidence of settlement long before that in the form of burrows and burial grounds riddles the moor above the village. The name Hampnett means high farmstead, or words to that effect. At first glance, the church looks like a classic perpendicular building with southwest porch and a western tower in 3 stages with diagonal buttresses and an embattled parapet. But when you get inside, it becomes clear that originally it was a small Norman church, probably with a dumpy little tower above the choir. But perhaps the most exciting thing about this little church is the extraordinary Victorian decoration on the ceilings and walls. Between 1868 and 1871, the incumbent, a Reverend W. Wiggins, had the interior walls stencilled in a colourful medieval style. It gives us just a hint of what churches all over this area would have looked like before the Reformation, when, as we've discovered many times over the years, the architects of the iconoclastic age stripped the churches of all decoration and treasures. It hasn't always been popular with the parishioners. They tried hard to raise money to have the church whitewashed in the 20th century. But fortunately, for those of us who love this kind of decoration, they were only partially successful. G.E. Street, about whom we've heard many times recently in the Cotswold Explorer, massively restored the church in 1868, and his legacy is still apparent. The lectern, pews and tower screen remain, and the painting of the Last Supper, which originally formed the central part of the reredos above the altar, now hangs on the north wall of the nave. Just south of the chancel arch, the steps to the original rood survive. It's always fascinating to find relics of old architectural details of this kind. I do love stairways to nowhere. Just east of the church are the signs for a local footpath, which announces with some style that it's part of the Monarch's Way. This extraordinary right-of-way marks, as closely as possible, the route taken by the fleeing King Charles II in 1651 after being defeated at the Battle of Worcester by Cromwell's Parliamentarian army. It runs all the way from Worcester via Bristol and Yeovil to Shoreham, West Sussex, and it passes right through Hampnett. It is extraordinary to imagine the bedraggled troop of defeated soldiers marching their miserable way through this landscape towards their eventual escape to France. Those of you who have watched our films may remember we touched on this right-of-way some time back in Broad Camden, about 17 miles north of here. The old manor house is just beside the church, much altered over the years, and the old farm buildings, magnificent barns, storehouses and worksheds, have all been converted into lovely country homes. The barn right opposite the church has obviously reused some spectacular doors from somewhere to create a front entrance. It would be fascinating to discover from whence they came. They look almost monastic. The road follows the contours of the hill round the bluff and along the valley toward the rest of the village. Here we find a scattering of extremely pretty houses and cottages, some still in their original form, and others created by the merging of several smaller cottages. An excellent example of this is the Crooked House, much enlarged in the 1990s, whose owner we were lucky enough to meet. She stopped to ask us what on earth we were doing wandering about the village with cameras, which just goes to show how quiet a place this is, and how much a couple of mugs like ours seem out of place. Long may it stay that way. At the bottom of the hill is the old rectory, now known as Hampnett House, with a lovely circle of little cottages around its feet, which is showing all the signs of having recently been bought. The scaffolding is up and essential outbuildings are being built. The truth is that whatever the tendencies of people like me to bemoan change in the countryside, it is only with the injection of money and enthusiasm into these big houses that we will continue to have the pleasure of looking at them. Let's just hope for a sympathetic restoration. I hope you've enjoyed our little trip around Hampnett. I can't tell you how many times I've driven past the sign saying Hampnett Village only, never knowing this lovely place was here. We've had a lovely time. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You can find us on all the normal platforms, and we will find you again in the very near future, somewhere else in the Cotswolds.